The sound of the gunshot was so sharp, so jarring, it felt like the earth itself had cracked open. I didn't even have time to react before I saw Emma, my beautiful, sweet daughter, fall to the ground, her body jerking violently as the bullet struck her back. She gasped, the shock evident in her wide eyes as she crumpled against the pavement. The world slowed, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. I rushed to her, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling as I reached out to her. But as I knelt down, I saw the woman who had done this. Karen, the woman who had made our lives miserable for months, standing a few feet away with a gun still smoking in her hand. Her face was cold, expressionless, as if she hadn't just shot a child, my child, in the back. She wasn't supposed to be there, Karen muttered, her voice trembling, but there was no remorse in it. I didn't see her. The words hit me like a slap to the face. It didn't matter if she didn't see her. It didn't matter what she thought. All that mattered was what I was going to do next. And I knew this would be the last mistake Karen ever made. Before everything changed, life was predictable, steady, and secure. I was a man of routine, a man who thrived in structure. I worked as a senior engineer for a construction firm, managing large projects with precision. My world was full of blueprints, deadlines, and meticulous calculations. Every day followed the same rhythm. Wake up early, get Emma ready for the day, and then head to work. Life was quiet, structured, exactly how I liked it. Emma, my 12-year-old daughter, had cerebral palsy. Her world was different, but no less meaningful. She couldn't walk, and her speech was limited, but she had a light in her that brightened even the darkest days. We had a system, Laura, my wife, and I had made sure of that. Every task, every routine was designed to give Emma the best life we could provide. I was her protector, her guide, her constant support. Our mornings were simple. I helped Emma get dressed, carefully adjusted her wheelchair, and we would make our way to the car. I'd drop her off at therapy, then head to work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. There were no major worries, no life-altering problems, just the challenges of navigating the world with a child who needed more than most. But I never resented it. I embraced it. I thought I knew what hardship was. I thought I understood the limits of what one could endure. But I was wrong. The calm of my world was about to shatter, and in the blink of an eye, everything I had worked so hard to protect would be put to the test. Karen had been a nuisance in our lives for a while now. An overzealous member of the HOA, always with a complaint or a judgment about our family. But I never imagined she'd become a threat. I never imagined that the woman who wielded her power like a weapon would take it too far. And yet, here we were. The world I knew was slipping away. It began with the small things. Karen had always been vocal about her standards for the neighborhood, but her complaints were usually petty. Things like the noise from Emma's therapy sessions or the wheelchair ramp that wasn't exactly to her liking. I never took her seriously. I'd humor her with polite responses, knowing all along that her issues were rooted in personal prejudice, not actual problems. But then, she started escalating. It wasn't enough for her to complain to me directly. She began taking her concerns to the HOA board, spreading her disdain for us under the guise of neighborhood improvement. It started with a letter, a formal complaint about the accessibility ramp in our yard, which we had built with the proper permits. She claimed it was an eyesore, and even went so far as to call it a nuisance to the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal. At first, I thought it was just another attempt to control us. But then came the meetings where Karen, with her air of self-importance, would stand before the board and talk about how unfit we were to live here. She spoke of our family as if we were a blight to the community. I couldn't let this go on. I stood up at one of the HOA meetings to present our case, explaining that Emma's therapy was part of her medical treatment and that the ramp was a necessity, not a luxury. I thought I'd made a reasonable argument, and I thought I'd have the support of the neighbors who knew us, who knew Emma. But Karen wasn't done. She wanted more than just compliance with the HOA's rules. She wanted control. And when she didn't get it, she decided to take matters into her own hands. The day the shooting happened was like any other, at least at first. Emma and I were on our daily walk to the mailbox when I heard the familiar sound of a car engine revving. I looked up, and there she was, Karen, speeding down the street in her SUV. I didn't think anything of it at first, but then she slammed on the brakes right in front of us. I froze. Emma, who was still getting used to her surroundings, didn't see her coming. She was looking down at the ground, distracted by something. And then, in a moment that felt like it lasted a lifetime, Karen opened her door. She stepped out, and without any warning, raised a handgun and fired. I saw the flash of the gun before I heard the shot. It was too quick for me to react, but I watched in horror as Emma crumpled to the pavement, the blood spreading around her like a dark stain. The world slowed, but the terror in my chest was unrelenting. Karen stood there, still holding the gun, her face cold, almost confused. She looked down at Emma, who was lying motionless on the ground. "I didn't see her," Karen muttered, as though that made it all okay. "I didn't see her." But there was no time for explanation, no time for remorse, only action. I knelt beside Emma, my hands already searching for signs of life, already planning the next steps, as everything in me shifted from shock to cold determination. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and now I would make sure she understood the full extent of her actions. The world around me felt like it had stopped. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in my ears, a ringing reminder of what had just happened. But even in that chaos, I knew there was no room for panic, no room for emotions to cloud my judgment. I couldn't let the shock of what had just occurred dictate my next move. I looked down at Emma, my heart hammering in my chest as I checked her pulse. It was faint, but it was there. She wasn't gone yet. There was still hope. I didn't look up at Karen. I didn't need to see her face to know what I would find. Fear, maybe, but more likely disbelief that her actions had gone this far. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was probably already thinking of a way to talk herself out of this, to twist the narrative into something that made her the victim. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. There would be no room for emotion in this fight. It wasn't just about saving Emma's life. It was about something far more critical, justice. I turned my focus inward, surveying the scene. The house, the car parked nearby, the gun in Karen's hand still smoking slightly. Everything about the situation screamed urgency, but I had to remain calm. I needed to think clearly. The police were on their way, but by the time they arrived, I knew it would be too late to control the narrative. Karen had already made her move. Now, I would make mine. I wasn't going to let her spin this into a simple accident. I wouldn't allow her to walk away without facing the consequences of what she'd done. For now, I stayed silent, observing every detail, memorizing everything. This wasn't just about today, it was about the rest of our lives. And I would make sure Emma's story was told the way it deserved to be. By the time the ambulance arrived, I could hear the sirens wailing in the distance, cutting through the thick silence that had settled over the street. The quiet tension was broken only by the sound of Emma's shallow breaths and the faint rustle of Karen's footsteps as she stood a few feet away, frozen, the gun still loosely gripped in her hand. The paramedics rushed to Emma's side, but my attention never wavered from Karen. I could see the confusion on her face, her eyes darting back and forth as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just done. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized that her reckless actions would come with consequences. And now, those consequences were staring her right in the face. One of the paramedics glanced up at me, his face grim. "We need to get her to the hospital. Now," he said, urgency in his voice. They quickly moved Emma onto a stretcher, and I followed closely behind, my heart racing as I watched her small, fragile body being loaded into the ambulance. But as soon as the doors closed, my focus shifted. I had to make sure Karen didn't get away with this. I had to make sure the world knew what had happened. As the ambulance sped away, I turned to the officers who had arrived on the scene. They were taking their time, asking Karen questions, recording statements, as if there was any doubt about what had happened. But I knew better. I'd seen the gun. I'd heard the shot. I'd watched my daughter fall. "Don't let her leave," I said to one of the officers, my voice low but firm. "She shot my daughter. I want her held accountable." The officer gave me a nod, his expression unreadable, and moved to speak to Karen. I didn't know what she was saying to them, but I could guess. She was probably spinning some story, claiming it was an accident, that she hadn't seen Emma, just like she had said earlier. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook with that. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation. The next few hours were a blur. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, anger, and determination. I had no idea what the future held for Emma, but one thing was certain. Karen wasn't going to get away with this. I started making calls, reaching out to a lawyer I knew from my past life, someone who could help me navigate this legal nightmare. But even as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was just beginning. This wasn't just about getting Karen arrested. It was about making sure the truth came to light, no matter how hard that truth was to bear. By the time I walked into the hospital's emergency room, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. Emma was in surgery, and I couldn't be with her. The minutes felt like hours, and I stood there, pacing, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. Would she survive? What kind of life would she have after this? What would I tell her when she woke up? I could hear the muffled sound of voices behind me. People talking, nurses moving quickly, but all I could focus on was Karen. She had taken something from us, and I would make sure she would never have the chance to take anything else. The hours in the hospital seemed to stretch on forever. Emma was still in surgery, and every minute felt like a weight pressing down on me. I couldn't focus on anything else. The doctors were optimistic, but the seriousness of the injury weighed heavily on me. A gunshot wound her back, the kind of injury no child should ever have to endure. I had to hold it together, for Emma's sake, but all I wanted was to see her safe, to hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. But beneath the surface of this medical nightmare, something far darker was at play. Karen's actions weren't just a random outburst. There was more to this, more that I hadn't fully understood until now. I'd spent the night at the hospital, pacing and making calls. By morning, I'd secured a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate the complex web of legalities and bureaucracy that Karen's influence had woven around this town. But even more important, I was starting to realize that this wasn't just about a single act of violence. Karen was part of a larger problem, and if I wanted to bring her to justice, I would have to dig deeper. The lawyer, James, arrived early the next day. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, a former prosecutor who had seen everything from petty thefts to corporate fraud. He listened as I explained the situation, how Karen had tried to manipulate the HOA, how she had used her position to bully us, and ultimately, how she'd crossed the line into violence. I've been tracking Karen's activities for some time now, he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense. She's been involved in more than just neighborhood politics. The HOA is just the tip of the iceberg. She's got a network, connections, a lot of them, people in high places. She's not the innocent victim here. I was stunned. Karen, the woman who had caused all of this, was more than just a power-hungry HOA board member. She had been using her position to manipulate people, bending the law to suit her personal agenda. She was an expert at hiding behind her carefully crafted persona, pretending to be a concerned neighbor, when in reality, she was controlling things behind the scenes. She's been getting away with things like this for years, James continued, pulling out a folder of documents. There are complaints, incidents, things that should have been handled by the police long ago. But she's been using her connections to cover her tracks. If we're going to take her down, we need more than just her word against yours. We need evidence. It hit me then. This wasn't just about Karen's cruelty. It was about exposing a system of corruption that had allowed her to act with impunity for so long. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't going to be a simple legal battle. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter anymore. I was fighting for the truth. I would dig into her past, find the people she had manipulated, expose her network for what it was. And when the time came, I would make sure everyone saw who she truly was. I was no longer just a father trying to protect his daughter. I was a man with a mission to bring down someone who had spent too long hiding in the shadows, causing pain and destruction. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and Karen wouldn't be able to run from the truth much longer. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and late nights spent gathering information. I had learned quickly that Karen wasn't going to go down easily. She had covered her tracks well, using her position in the HOA to manipulate and control the narrative. But she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated me. James, my lawyer, was invaluable in the process. He wasn't just helping me prepare for a legal battle. He was guiding me through the system, teaching me how to fight back. We started by digging into Karen's background, tracing her activities within the HOA and beyond. It wasn't long before we found patterns, small instances of misconduct, things that could serve as a foundation for the case we were building. The first step was uncovering her network of influence. Karen had more connections than I realized. Her role in HOA gave her power, but she had also infiltrated other local organizations. There were whispers of financial irregularities in community projects that she had overseen. James and I started reaching out to people who had worked with her, former board members, contractors, and even employees from local businesses who had been on the receiving end of her manipulations. Every conversation was a piece of the puzzle. Slowly, we were starting to build a clearer picture of who Karen really was. A woman who had used her charm and her power to control others, hiding behind a mask of concern and civility. But behind that facade was something darker. I spent hours at the hospital, keeping watch over Emma. Her condition was improving, but she wasn't out of the woods yet. The doctors told me it would take time for her body to heal. I stayed by her side as much as I could, but my mind was divided between her and the fight I had ahead of me. I knew I couldn't afford to lose focus on either front. I started taking action on my own, gathering evidence that would expose Karen's lies. I met with a private investigator who had a reputation for uncovering the hidden sides of people in power. He was resourceful and had connections that I didn't. Together, we began to track Karen's movements, where she went, who she spoke to, what she did in her spare time. The more we learned, the more I realized that Karen's influence stretched far beyond what I had initially thought. I began preparing my own strategy, one that was methodical, precise, and above all, quiet. I would expose Karen for what she truly was. No loud outbursts, no public confrontations. I would let the facts speak for themselves. The plan was simple: gather the evidence, build the case, and wait for the right moment to strike. In the meantime, I reached out to the neighbors who had been supportive of us. I needed them to understand the truth, to know that what Karen had done wasn't just a personal attack on me and Emma. It was an attack on the community as a whole. She had tried to tear apart the fabric of our lives, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. The weight was excruciating. Every day felt like a battle, but I was resolute. I had everything in place, and I was confident that once Karen was exposed, there would be no way for her to escape the truth. But I couldn't rush it. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure the system worked, about proving that justice was possible, even for those who try to hide in the shadows. I kept my focus, my eyes on the endgame. I knew that the moment of reckoning was coming, and when it did, Karen would have nowhere to hide. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and late nights spent gathering information. I had learned quickly that Karen wasn't going to go down easily. She had covered her tracks well, using her position in the HOA to manipulate and control the narrative. But she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated me. James, my lawyer, was invaluable in the process. He wasn't just helping me prepare for a legal battle. He was guiding me through the system, teaching me how to fight back. We started by digging into Karen's background, tracing her activities within the HOA and beyond. It wasn't long before we found patterns, small instances of misconduct, things that could serve as a foundation for the case we were building. The first step was uncovering her network of influence. Karen had more connections than I realized. Her role in the HOA gave her power, but she had also infiltrated other local organizations. There were whispers of financial irregularities in community projects that she had overseen. James and I started reaching out to people who had worked with her, former board members, contractors, and even employees from local businesses who had been on the receiving end of her manipulations. Every conversation was a piece of the puzzle. Slowly, we were starting to build a clearer picture of who Karen really was. A woman who had used her charm and her power to control others, hiding behind a mask of concern and civility. But behind that facade was something darker. I spent hours at the hospital, keeping watch over Emma. Her condition was improving, but she wasn't out of the woods yet. The doctors told me it would take time for her body to heal. I stayed by her side as much as I could, but my mind was divided between her and the fight I had ahead of me. I knew I couldn't afford to lose focus on either front. I started taking action on my own, gathering evidence that would expose Karen's lies. I met with a private investigator who had a reputation for uncovering the hidden sides of people in power. He was resourceful and had connections that I didn't. Together, we began to track Karen's movements, where she went, who she spoke to, what she did in her spare time. The more we learned, the more I realized that Karen's influence stretched far beyond what I had initially thought. I began preparing my own strategy, one that was methodical, precise, and above all, quiet. I would expose Karen for what she truly was. No loud outbursts, no public confrontations. I would let the facts speak for themselves. The plan was simple: gather the evidence, build the case, and wait for the right moment to strike. In the meantime, I reached out to the neighbors who had been supportive of us. I needed them to understand the truth, to know that what Karen had done wasn't just a personal attack on me and Emma. It was an attack on the community as a whole. She had tried to tear apart the fabric of our lives, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. The weight was excruciating. Every day felt like a battle, but I was resolute. I had everything in place, and I was confident that once Karen was exposed, there would be no way for her to escape the truth. But I couldn't rush it. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure the system worked, about proving that justice was possible, even for those who tried to hide in shadows. I kept my focus, my eyes on the end game. I knew that the moment of reckoning was coming, and when it did, Karen would have nowhere to hide. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen was sitting rigidly in her chair, her once confident posture now broken, her eyes darting nervously around the room as the board members started to speak. But it wasn't just the board members anymore. The truth had begun to spread beyond the confines of this small meeting. Neighbors, residents who had watched from the sidelines, were beginning to take notice. One of the board members, a man named Mr. Harris, spoke first. His voice was firm but measured. "We've all seen the evidence, Karen. The footage is clear, and the testimonies are damning. There's no more room for debate." I stood silently, my eyes fixed on Karen. She was no longer the commanding presence she once was. She was small now, diminished. Her usual manipulative charm had vanished, replaced by a deep, sinking panic that no amount of wealth or influence could cover. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she was finally being held accountable. I didn't mean to," Karen began, her voice faltering, but she couldn't find the words to make any sense of it. She had no defense. She had tried to justify herself in her own mind, and maybe she believed her version of events, but the truth didn't care about what she thought. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see. "Karen," I said quietly, but my voice carried across the room, drawing everyone's attention. "You don't get to say that. You didn't make a mistake. You aimed that gun, and you pulled the trigger. And now we all know the truth." I could see the weight of the moment settle over the board. The people who had once been so passive, who had turned a blind eye to her abuses, now looked at her with open disdain. Some whispered among themselves. Others simply stared at her, their faces hardening with disbelief. "You didn't just hurt my daughter," I continued. "You tried to erase us. You tried to erase the truth. You thought your position would protect you, but it didn't, and it never will again." The board members were looking at each other now, nodding. One of them, a woman named Mrs. Lynn, stood up. "I think we've heard enough," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Karen, we're going to have to inform the authorities. This is no longer an internal HOA matter. This is criminal." I saw Karen's face go pale. She started to open her mouth again, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had no excuse. The public humiliation, the exposure of her lies, was too much for her to spin anymore. As the board members began calling the police and preparing to remove her from the meeting, I could see the crowd growing. Neighbors who had once sided with Karen, or simply ignored her antics, were now stepping forward, witnesses to the injustice she had caused. They were asking questions, demanding answers, and no longer looking the other way. It was too late for Karen. I turned to leave, my mind still on Emma, but I knew the battle had been won. Not just for my daughter's safety, but for every person Karen had ever manipulated. As I walked out of the meeting room, the weight of everything finally began to settle in. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a necessary step in the fight for justice. It felt like the beginning of the end for Karen, and for anyone else who thought they could hide behind their power and influence. The police were swift in their response, arriving just as the board members finalized a decision to involve law enforcement. Karen's face, once full of arrogance and self-importance, was now a mask of panic. She tried to plead with the officers, but her words were incoherent, desperate. They were having none of it. By the time the handcuffs were placed on her wrists, Karen had lost everything. Her position in the HOA, her reputation, her facade of control. But the real blow wasn't just the arrest. It was the way the community, the people who had once been afraid of her power, now saw her for who she truly was. A bully who had manipulated the system to her advantage. The community she had tried to control was finally turning against her. I stood at the back of the room, watching the scene unfold. There was no joy in me, no satisfaction in seeing her taken away. What Karen had done to Emma, what she had put our family through, was unforgivable. But it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching her crumble. It was about the lesson, one that had been learned by everyone in that room. Karma had a way of catching up with people like Karen. She had spent her life thinking she was untouchable, believing that her wealth and influence gave her the right to control others. But now, everything she had built, every lie, every manipulation, was crumbling in front of her. As the officers led her away, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. This was the justice I had fought for. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and precise. It had taken everything in me to remain calm, to play the long game. But now, with Karen in custody, the truth had won. Emma, despite everything, would heal, and we would rebuild. But Karen? She would never regain what she had lost. The fallout from the incident wasn't immediate, but it didn't take long for the word to spread. The HOA was dissolved, the board disbanded. New leadership was put in place, people who believed in fairness and accountability, not manipulation and control. Neighbors who had once turned a blind eye to Karen's abuse of power now began to speak up, sharing their own stories of how she had used her position to bully and intimidate. And for Emma, the road to recovery was long, but filled with hope. The bullet wound her back would leave scars, but it wouldn't define her. She was strong. She always had been. Her spirit, her light, was undeterred by Karen's cruelty. Emma would go on to do great things, and I would be there every step of the way, supporting her as I always had. In the end, justice was served, not with a flash of anger, but with the quiet, unrelenting force of truth. And for that, I could finally find peace. Sitting in the quiet of my home that evening, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The weight of everything that had happened, Emma's injury, Karen's betrayal, the months of uncertainty, was slowly beginning to lift. It wasn't over, not completely, but we had won. And in that victory, I found a strange sense of peace. I thought about the years I'd spent building a life for Emma, creating a space where she could thrive, even with her challenges. I had always thought that the biggest battles were the ones I fought for her every day, navigating doctor's appointments, managing therapy, helping her adapt to a world that wasn't designed for her. But what I realized now was that the hardest fight wasn't the one on the outside. It was the fight for her dignity, for her right to exist in a world that often saw her as a burden, not a gift. Karen had tried to strip that from her. She had tried to break us. But we were stronger than she could ever have imagined. I had always thought that doing the right thing meant following the rules, staying within the lines. But sometimes it meant standing up when the world tried to push you down. It meant holding your ground, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Looking at Emma now, as she rested peacefully, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Gratitude. Gratitude for the strength of my family, for the resilience of my daughter, and for the lesson that justice, while often slow, always finds a way to balance itself. There would be more battles to face, but for now, we had one, and that was enough. What would you do if someone tried to destroy your family's peace? Would you stand by silently, or would you fight back? Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, and patient, but it always finds a way to make things right. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of justice, resilience, and the quiet power of doing what's right.